We have a couple of program notes before we begin. Please use the questions section of your webinar interface to submit questions at any time throughout the presentation. That will help facilitate a productive question and answer session after we hear from our speakers. If you have any technical problems during the call, please contact Michelle Santiago, whose contact information I sent you about half an hour ago. And now over to Sarita Brown, President of Excellencia in Education, who will moderate today's discussion.
Thank you, David, and welcome to everyone to today's discussion. We are tackling a topic of national importance, Latino males in higher education, and we're going to focus on action for progress. Excellencia in Education presents the webinar in partnership with the Division of Diversity and Community Engagement at the University of Texas at Austin, whose president, Greg Fenves, is a president for Latino Student Success. As collaborators for today's webinar, we combine forces to address this important topic. Excellencia in Education provides data-driven analysis, evidence-based practices, and networks and partnerships to advance action for progress for Latino student success. In organizing today's discussion, each speaker has brought to this process his or her expertise, knowledge, and a record of impact as we looked at this important topic. I'd like to introduce them in the order in which they will speak. Deborah Santiago is co-founder, Chief Operating Officer, and Vice President at Excellencia in Education. William Serrata is President of El Paso Community College and a President for Latino Student Success. And Victor Saenz is Professor of Educational Administration and Executive Director of Project Males at the University of Texas at Austin. Our first speaker, Deborah Santiago, is the architect of Excellencia in Education's 12-year record of research and analysis. She will begin our discussion by focusing on the current state of Latino males in higher education.
Hi, everyone. Pleased to be with you just to cover a very quick snapshot of Latino males in education today with a real focus on college going and college completion. I think it sets a context for the important work that our colleagues in El Paso and in Austin are going to be sharing with us in a moment. And first I want to just get a picture in your head of where we are with Latino males and our educational attainment. So we pulled a little bit of data to share with you. You know, there's often a conversation about Latino males and where they are and their high school dropout rate. So we wanted to show you there has been a lot of progress. Latino males' high school dropout rate has decreased from 32% 14 years ago in 2000 to 12% in 2014. And that compares to an overall dropout rate that was 12% and it's now 7%. So I still want to point out there is a gap and it's still significant and there's still a good opportunity for important work to be done to further address and close this high school dropout rate for Latino males and for all students. We'd like to see that 7% also be zero. So there's still a lot of opportunity, but I want to make sure that we're clear that we have seen a lot of progress in 14 years. And that means that Latino males are graduating from high school and have opportunities to go to college. And we need to pay attention to that stream of students, so addressing them in high school but also college. This is a second data point you want to keep in your head as you hear about action and strategies. And that is that college enrollment for males has increased, for Latino males has increased, but it's been slower than females, for Latinas. And part of the reason we share this is that, you know, for us, this is not a point that it's male versus female as we address these issues. It's not an either-or paradigm. We've made progress. It's that Latino males are still, there's a gap between male progress in enrollment and females. And we take a look at the gaps overall. And in 2005, there was a 20% gap in college enrollment between Latinos and Latinas. And what we're seeing now is a much smaller gap between them, but we're still seeing a gap. And that's something that is an opportunity to address their college enrollment overall. The third we want to share with you is one of attainment. And this is just a quick show of educational attainment. This is the highest level of educational attainment achieved by males, Latino males, 25 and over. And what we see is that 20% of Latino males have earned an associate degree or higher. And that's an important measure. And when you look here, also that 66% of Latino males have less than high school or a high school diploma. And that shows that there's still a great deal of work to be done in the broader polis. The first two data points we shared with you were enrolled students. This is the broader population. And so it's important we take a look at less than high school, some college, no degree, and those have gotten a degree. But our attainment is there. And the last point I want to share with you is a little bit of data comparing Latino males with other males. And what we see here is that this is adults 25 and over. About 20% of Hispanic males have earned an associate degree or higher, compared to 45% of white males, adults, 30% of African American males, and 62% of Asian males. So it shows we've made progress. There's still a great deal of work to be done to make sure that we're serving this critical population.
Thank you, Deborah. And for all of you who are participating and writing fast as this part of the discussion is going on, please remember that there is a resource page you've already been given access to. There is a fact sheet. Our colleagues have provided other information, and we will also be sharing the slides that we are using to support the conversation. So beginning as we have with a snapshot of where we are statistically, what the trend line is in terms of Latino participation, Latino males. We do this with an effort to focus on where we are, but with the commitment to where we want to take this discussion and where we want to go as it relates to Latino male success. As we move into the next stage of this conversation, we turn to William Serrata, an educational leader whose long-standing commitment to student success led him to focus on the critical need to engage Latino males. As president of El Paso Community College, he is leading his institution to address immediate and long-term actions to meet the challenge. Turn things over to President Serrata.
Thank you, Sarita, so much. It's certainly an honor and a privilege to present on this most critical topic with regards to Latino males in higher education. I'm going to begin with reviewing two specific programs that we have showed great promise, and the data continues to improve with regards to engaging Latino males in the pipeline into higher education and then helping them be successful and supporting their success within higher education. These two particular programs are our dual credit and early college high school programs. And so let me start with a review of our data at El Paso Community College. We can go to next slide, please. So El Paso Community College was created in 1969. We opened for classes in 1971. And in those 47 years, we've grown to just under 30,000 students, fall head count. You see the demographic data with regards to who we serve. And we're at 56% female students and 44% male students. Now what you see is that actually outperforms most institutions of higher education, and in particular most community colleges. I've worked at institutions where the disparity has been 60% female to 40% male, and I've seen others in the data that are as separated as much as 62% female and 38% male. And this is the first piece of data that we all need to look at with regards to the breakup of our particular enrollment, the segmentation of that enrollment. If last time I checked, the census data is roughly 50% male, 50% females. Yes, and in particular Latino males. Latinos are the only population that there's actually more males born than females. Approximately 105 males born for every 100 females. So this becomes the first data point that we need to focus on. As you see, we are in a predominantly Hispanic community. 81% of our community is Hispanic and 85% of my student body is Hispanic. Next slide, please. So we're nationally known. El Paso Community College, I'm very fortunate to work here. We're nationally known for our early college high school programs. There's parts of the state of Texas and part of the nation that have more early college high schools. I've yet to see a part of the state or nation that has more successful early college high schools. And what I mean is the 10 early college high schools that we currently have, 73% of our students receive their associate's degree prior to graduating from high school. The national average is 30%. So when we started to really focus on Latino males, we had to break that data down further. What you see on this screen is a 5-year snapshot of the percentage of males in our early college high schools and the percentage of Latino males in our early college high schools. Prior to arriving at El Paso Community College in the fall of 2012, we again were very well known for our early college high school program, but no one had ever looked at the demographics. And so we meet regularly with the superintendents and the principals of these early college high schools, and I started to bring it to their attention when I started to see 70% of early college high school students being female. And the demographic data follows that. So you can see in fall 2011, we were at 40% of the early college high schools being male. So almost 60% female, and only a third of them being Hispanic males. Again, we needed to focus and be intentional. You'll hear Deborah and you'll hear Sarita speak to intentionality, and intentionality matters. And so we started to review the data with each of the respective leaders from the school districts and the specific principals from the early college high schools, and started to make it a point that we really need to focus on this data as we review applications for the early college high school. You see this most recent fall, we've improved males up to about 42.5%, and we've improved Hispanic males to up to almost 37%. Next slide, please. Dual credit. So early college high school students have the opportunity to receive the associate's degree while they're still in high school. What the data has shown us is that dual credit is just as powerful. While they don't have the opportunity to earn an associate's degree, they do have the opportunity to accumulate credits, college credits, while they're still in high school. Let me rest everyone's concern. These are high school faculty that have the credentials to be college faculty. So they have a master's degree plus 18 hours in the field, and the students have to show college readiness. Therefore, they have to meet the cut scores to be in this college course while still in high school. Our data shows that as little as 1 credit hour of dual credit increases persistence rates in the first year of college, their freshman year, up to 88%. And 5 years later, the state data shows us that nearly half of them have a baccalaureate degree, and 58% of them have at least an associate's degree. So in order to close this attainment gap, we need to look at specific strategies that work. So dual credit is proving to be just as powerful as an early college high school opportunity. Again, if you're not breaking down the data and you're not looking at your data and disaggregating your data, then it's hard to tell. So I bring this to my own team's attention. And again, you see in the fall of 2011, we were at about 1,375 or 41.5% of our dual credit population being male. Very similar to our early college high school. And an overrepresentation of young ladies, and we needed to make sure it's not a zero-sum game. We need to make sure that these young men are also taking advantage. As you see, only 35% of them were Hispanic males. So over the course, this has been a strategy that we have focused on and increasing. You can see both the raw number of dual credit students increasing, as well as the percentage and the composition of Hispanic males, to where this past fall we were at 1,886 of the population, so 44%. We've increased it significantly, and we need to continue to do that. And we've also increased the Hispanic male share up to 38%. Next slide, please. And then ultimately, we're looking at the long term. And so what we show is this is a breakdown of our early college high school graduates who have gone on. Our data continues to be clear. These particular segments of our student population, both early college high school as well as dual credit, they outperform every other segment of the population at El Paso Community College, but they also outperformed every other segment at our sister university, the University of Texas, El Paso. And you can see over the course of time, again, these programs are relatively new, but you see that we've already granted, UTEP has already granted 190 bachelor's degrees to these former students, additional 8 master's degrees, and then they go on to other institutions of higher ed as well. This number will continue to increase. We'll start to see 1,000 early college high school graduates per year in the next 3 years, and they now comprise about a quarter, 25% of UTEP's junior class. The relationship for our university partners, remember that these are students that are considered first-time in college students, even though they have an associate's degree. So they will be classified as juniors, and they will have 6 years to receive those last 2 years for their baccalaureate and count towards that institution's graduation rate. So all the graduates that I've had, well over 1,500 from early college high schools, none of them count towards our graduation rate at El Paso Community College due to the IPEDS formulation. But we understand that this is the right thing to do to increase the number of Hispanic males and increase the matriculation. Over 80% of these students matriculate into higher education immediately after graduating from high school. And again, their success rates at EPCC are at 90%, A, B's, and C's in subsequent courses. So their success continues at the college, and it goes on and continues at the university. And I will now turn it back to Sarita.
Thank you so much. So in this conversation so far, we are tackling an issue of critical importance to our country's future because we are talking about human capital. We are raising up the disparity in success for Latino males. We have begun with a grounding as it relates to the current state of education, and we have heard and are now responding to actual activities, actions, systemic approaches by an educational leader within an institution. All of this is part of this discussion, but it is framed by how we talk about this disparity in men of color, this disparity in Latino males. And for our final speaker, we turn to Victor Saenz. He brings to this effort his experience as a faculty member, a scholar, an author, and executive director of Project Males at the University of Texas at Austin. Victor and his colleagues have created powerful vehicles for sustained action for progress. We turn things over to Victor.
Thank you, Sarita, and thank you again to Excelencia in Education for this amazing opportunity to be able to address this issue and advance it at the national level. The scale of these particular challenges really warrants a national response, and the platform we're being afforded here through this webinar, but also the ongoing work for many years now that Excelencia has been advancing, is certainly very much appreciated and very much needed to be able to discuss this issue in responsible and thoughtful ways, and to ultimately be able to move in the direction of actions for progress. So I'm really honored to be a part of this panel and to listen to all the different ways that we have to sort of problematize and operationalize this issue, and often with data. And appreciate Deborah kind of setting the table in that regard. And then also to hear from President Serrata and the way that one individual institution is taking this national issue or challenge and really applying it at the local level, really drilling down deep into the data, and not only disaggregating the data as a first step, but actually holding folks accountable for helping to improve in key areas around how we are better serving this student population of Latino males. So, I've been privileged to be able to work on this issue of Latino males in education for many years now, and as a researcher at a public flagship university here in Texas, this was definitely part of my research agenda when I first arrived, to focus intently on this issue, that realizing how important it is to the state and to the country, given the demographic urgency and in reality that many of our states are dealing with, and increasingly nationally as well. You come to find that as a researcher, there had not been a lot of prominent scholarship that really asked these important questions. And so if I could get the next slide up, the kinds of questions that we've been asking in our research, I think, really address the question of what is happening to Latino boys in education. If we could please advance to the next slide. All right. So with this question of what is happening to, I'm sorry, go back one, I'm sorry, my apologies. What is happening to males in schools? This is a really important set of questions that we need to be asking related to this population of students. And the work that we've done here at UT Austin in concert with partners like El Paso Community College and so many other institutions, both K-12 and higher education, have really begun to explore these issues as thoughtfully as we can. We know, for example, that boys of color, particularly Latino boys, tend to dominate schools that are under-resourced, that have newer teachers, high teacher and leadership turnover. We also know that boys of color, particularly Latino boys, are overrepresented in the special education pipeline, particularly in the categories of behavioral and emotional challenges. They're also overrepresented in the school discipline pipeline, more likely than their peers to be suspended and expelled. And of course, it's also given a rise to the phenomenon of chronic absenteeism, something that we've been tracking now for quite some time. So these are all issues, this overrepresentation in special education ranks or the school discipline pipeline, that I think there's been a broader awareness around this issue with respect to African American males in schools. But as I mentioned earlier, the research on how these experiences affect Latino males is really not as well established, and that's really surprising given the demographic imperative that's kind of all around us. And so we've been fortunate to partner with institutions here in Texas to advance these conversations and to be able to ask these questions both empirically but also hand in hand with practitioners who are working day in, day out with these communities. The other issue I would ask with respect to this broader question about what's happening to Latino males in schools is we know that the teacher ranks in this country are increasingly female, and particularly white female. So they're 85% of the teacher workforce is currently female in this country. So, we're seeing continual sort of disappearance of male teachers within the teacher workforce, not to mention the fact that our pre-service teaching programs across the country are still having to do much better in addressing the disparate learning styles for boys and girls, but also issues around cultural competency, etc. So there's still a lot of work to be done, and we start piecing together some of the responses to what's happening to Latino boys. You start getting a broader picture of the set of challenges that might befall them. And in fact, what I want to highlight here, folks, is that these are a set of issues that are structural and systemic in nature that often have nothing to do with the boy. And so that's a very key way to frame this issue about what's happening to Latino males in schools by reframing it with a strong focus on, again, the set of systems and structures that are in place that might be perpetuating some of the very sobering statistics that we often look at around each of these key dimensions. So if we can advance to the next slide now. In taking that set of broader conversations, there's a lot of focus, and as well there should be, on how we can intervene, how we can move to action, and the set of sort of competing narratives here around this issue around Latino boys. One is partly to address the gender gap in educational attainment. So we hear a lot, as we did earlier in the webinar, about what do those gender gaps look like nationally, and we can drill down at the state level, drill down at the local level. And those gaps are going to be prevalent, and so part of what we still have to do, though, is not ignore the fact that those gaps are there, and really have a good understanding of what they look like within the local context. So if we're going to move to progress on this particular issue, we have to be able to operationalize this within our local context, which is why I'm very pleased that President Serrata offered his experience in El Paso. That's the kind of leadership I think we need, at the local level within our institutions to be able to drill down deep into that data, understand the real dimensions and dynamics of what that gap actually looks like, and even across all these different populations of students that we serve. I think also nationally that there's a lot of urgency right now focused on boys of color. And this growing national awareness is beginning to, I think, instigate action at the local level. So I highlight there as an example My Brother's Keeper. President Obama launched that initiative 2 years ago as a way to sort of mobilize efforts at the local level and across the nation now to improve the life and educational opportunities for boys and young men of color. And My Brother's Keeper, I think, has come along at a really opportune moment in this national conversation around boys and boys of color. You know, given President Obama's background, the fact that, you know, he has addressed this issue and made it part of his priorities, set of priorities towards the latter half of his administration, I think has really signaled a broader national awareness and consciousness about the challenges facing boys of color. So, you know, the work that we're trying to do in Texas, focus on Latino males, is, you know, how are we defining the conversation around boys of color to include Latino males, to include the fact that they represent this demographic urgency nationally. And I think that's the important work that needs to happen at the local level, something that we're directly engaged in here in Central Texas, but we see evident in MBK efforts around the country. So I think the last 2 years have really catalyzed the work focused on boys of color at the local level in some really important ways, and it took, again, a presidential level initiative to be able to do that. So it's important that we tip our hat to that, because that's really brought forth a lot of important progress at the local level. And then I think the last two things that I'd add about, you know, what are some actions that are taking place towards progress. I think there is greater urgency right now in Hispanic educational success, you know, broadly speaking. And what I think we need to do, in addition to sort of operationalizing the gender gap at all levels, is to actually focus more intently on programming and actions towards boys, and in this case, of course, Latino boys and young men. And by that, we mean, as we often say within our research, you know, revisiting the set of programs and policies that we have in place with men in mind, and particularly Latino males in mind, and understanding that from the research we learned, for example, that the Latino males are really having challenges in how they transition to college. The kind of help-seeking behaviors that they exhibit once they get there are sometimes problematic for these young men. They're not seeking out or engaging with the set of services and programs and offerings that all of our institutions are there to provide. And so I think that's incumbent, that places an emphasis, I think, on our institutions to be much more proactive in focusing on males directly, and not waiting, in other words, for them to come to us. And I think that's a very distinct shift, I think, paradigm shift that needs to happen on the part of our institutions, both K-12 and higher education. And I think MBK, as a national initiative, has given this issue sort of a broader national imperative that can give us some political cover to really address this issue much more urgently, perhaps, than we are. And then speaking of imperatives, I think a lot of the conversation on boys and young men of color is really focusing on the economic imperative, but we cannot forget the equity, the gender equity imperative, and certainly not the social justice imperative as well. If we're looking for ways to move to progress, we need to draw upon all these different broader national trends and currents and narratives that are helping us to do this work, and basically making a case for it, for making more progress at the local level. Next slide, please. So how have we responded here locally? And again, really appreciate the opportunity to be able to share the work through Project MAILS. MAILS, by the way, is an acronym for Mentoring to Achieve Latino Educational Success. And as it happens, you know, President Serrata being on the webinar, Project MAILS was his idea. The naming of this idea as an initiative began many years ago in conversation that he and I had about how we can mobilize efforts where the research had been beginning to build, if you will. How can we begin to translate that research into action? And we seized upon the key strategy of mentoring to be able to do that. And of course, mentoring is in our name, Project MAILS, and that's one of the key strategies that we've adopted in this translation from research to practice. And what you see here is kind of the broader sort of programmatic chart of the work we do here at UT Austin, anchored at the Division of Diversity and Community Engagement. You know, we started with a broad research agenda focused on Latino males P through 16, and that's produced a series of journal articles, op-eds, and even a book, a recent book. But all that to say that you know, that's all well and good as a faculty member or as a researcher, but again, how do we begin to translate that work into direct benefit for our community? And so in 2010, we launched our own mentoring program based here at UT Austin in conjunction with local partners, in this case, Austin Independent School District. We piloted our mentoring project at a local high school, Travis High School, and the model is pretty simple and straightforward. We're leveraging the intellectual capital of our institution. In this case, I'm talking about undergraduate students at UT Austin who are looking for meaningful opportunities to engage in the community and perhaps even derive some sort of learning from that experience. And we're using and recruiting them, training them to go out and mentor young boys of color in the Austin area. And you know, these students are all undergraduates. We're up to about 90 or so that are at different points in the program. About half of them are currently engaged currently enrolled in a year-long service learning course where we actually train our students, and so that's become a very important vehicle to be able to deploy our curriculum, our mentoring curriculum, but also as a platform to be able to reflect upon the important service learning opportunity that they're being afforded, and to really look at, you know, what are the broader set of conversations that they're a part of, and they're looking to advance at the local level, literally, you know, as an actionable response to this issue at the local level. The third piece of the project is our newest venture, the Texas Ed Consortium for Male Students of Color. We launched this 3 years ago in partnership with K-12 school districts, with community colleges like El Paso Community College and several others, and several four-year institutions. It's a statewide network of institutions across the educational spectrum that are all bringing together to leverage our collective knowledge and experience and expertise around success strategies for male students of color. So these represent, I think in many ways, the entire Project Males initiative represents, you know, taking the ideation and the research directly to translate it for the benefit of students and for the benefit of, in this case, Latino males that we are serving through our various different initiatives, both our mentoring efforts here locally and then the statewide efforts to our consortium. Next slide, please. So part of what we do with the project is to engage heavily in dissemination work. Because we recognize that, you know, a little old project here in Austin, Texas, you know, it's a great big country out there, and to be able to connect with scholars and practitioners across the state and across the country requires us to be very creative. One of the ways we've been able to do that is through our affiliate, Project Males Faculty and Research Affiliate Network, a national network of scholars, many of these young emerging scholars around the country based at institutions like UT Arlington, University of Arizona, Miami of Ohio, Cal State Sacramento, Florida International, on and on. All these represent young scholars whose research agenda is directly aligned with the work of the project. And we're out there working to build capacity by providing a platform for these young scholars to share their research focused on Latino males. And you know, we've been able to invite about 25 now across the country, so we're really pleased to do that. Every month we put out a research brief, a 2-page brief, because we've got to be brief when we're trying to translate our research for a wider audience of practitioners and administrators. But you can find these on our website here, projectmales.org, on our research tab. But again, just have to tip our hat to the broader growing network of young scholars that's helping to advance this work, and it's important that we realize that they're out there, because it's not just a handful of people doing this work now. It's a whole small army of folks that are helping to advance this work. And we're also participating in capacity building through this initiative. We're training young scholars, helping to advance their research agenda, and even in brokering new opportunities for collaboration across the country. So it's a very key part of what we do. We also partner with organizations like, obviously, Excelencia through this webinar, but also the American Council on Education. My colleague at Texas A&M, Luis Bon Juan, he and I, of course, have been working very closely on this research agenda for many years now. We just co-authored a research brief in partnership with American Council on Education to highlight the work of our consortium, our statewide project. And that just came out last month. You can find that on our website. And of course, our newest joint venture that Luis and I worked on along with our co-editor, Julie Lopez Figueroa, focusing on, again, highlighting emerging voices in scholarship focused on Latino males in higher education. And this recent book from Stylus Publishing, I think, is a great compilation of all these different voices that we're talking about. People around the country that are doing important work to advance this conversation. And I think because this is a national platform, we've got people from around the country logged in to this webinar, we need to be able to connect and reach out to folks that are doing this work and find ways to foster these relationships with these young scholars and connect them directly to the kind of challenges that our school districts and our community colleges and our four-year institutions are dealing with day in, day out. There's some really, really important, intelligent voices out there advancing this conversation, and we're proud to be able to partner with them here with Project Males. So I think there's one more slide. Next slide, please. Well, actually, I think this brings me to my part.
Victor, that's a perfect segue, because as you were speaking, we were already seeing people respond, and for those who have questions in their head and have not put their fingers on the keyboard, we would encourage you to look at the questions section of the webinar and to enter your questions. To all of you as the panel, not only have you set the stage, but you've demonstrated the depth of thought and depth of commitment that this conversation should engage from all of us. And so with this, we would like to turn our attention to those of you who have joined us and in as authentic a way as possible that you can to share your questions. And we'll have David Englund will be curating them, and we'll use the time we have left to speak to the issues.
Thank you, Sarita. The first question comes from Wallace Johnson from San Bernardino Valley College. Inside Higher Ed blogger Matthew Reed has recently noted a gender skew among community college students above the age of 22. Reed notes that there is a significant gap between the numbers of men and women attending college in this demographic. Are there specific efforts in community colleges to attract Latino men above the age of 22, and what would those initiatives entail?
Thank you, David. It's William, and so I'll begin, and then I'll let Deborah and Sarita chime in. You know, the adult learner is the hardest population for any of us to reach, and what we see is, you know, the high school pipeline becomes so important with regards to. We did a study when I was still living in South Texas, and what we noted was that if a student, and again a predominantly Hispanic region of the state and nation, if a student waited more than 1 year to matriculate into higher ed, the data showed they had less than a 10% chance of earning a credential. So it becomes paramount to really build that pipeline from high school to college. And the high school student is a captured audience, and that's why we really focus on ensuring that particular segment is matriculating. With regards to the adult learner, what we see is we like all other community colleges, have a direct relationship with the economy. We get those Latino older than 22 Latino males when the economy is bad and unemployment is high. They're coming back to retool and reskill, and so we'll continue to target them in that fashion. Again, what we're looking at doing is we're running data to see how many students left the institution in good standing with more than 15 credit hours, no reason they were in good standing, and we're checking through National Student Clearinghouse to see if they're enrolled anywhere else. If they're not, then we're following up with them, and we're partnering with other institutions to provide online opportunities for them should they be too busy to come in person, or to reach out that they do rematriculate into the institution.
The one thing I would add to that is we're seeing increased effort by some community colleges to provide prior learning assessments and competency-based education as a way of giving some of our adult learners, especially males, some college credit for work they've already done as an effort to encourage their continuation in the to the associate degree.
Okay, our next question comes from Oscar Patron from the University of Pittsburgh. The gap in college graduation rates between Latinas and Latinos shows that the gap widened more so than at other points in the mid-90s. What happened in that time period that made Latino males fall even more behind in those years?
This is Victor.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, please.
So this is Victor. Great question, Oscar, and I think there's a lot we can speculate about what's going on in the early 90s, but you know, the kind of work that we've done and written about, you know, looks at broader societal trends that might be shaping the emergence of that gender gap, because it's not just unique to the Latino community for those years. You see that gender gap emerge across other racial ethnic groups, even across socioeconomic status. So, you know, there's something broader going on there during that particular era, whether you call that the emergence of a generation of young people that are children of, let's say, after the women's movement or after some of the other civil rights movements from the prior generation. You know, that's definitely a key turning point. So there's a lot we can speculate, but you know, I think it really begs an important other set of questions about, you know, why is it also existing across various other racial ethnic groups? And let me also say this, just to reframe this growing gender gap. Part of the gap is emerging not just because males may be quote unquote disappearing or vanishing, although I try not to use that language anymore, but because they're not keeping pace with females. So the gap is actually emerging because more and more women are accelerating their enrollment in higher education and towards degree attainment. So that's part of the reason why the gap is growing, if you will, at least the gender gap, but we choose to define that gap in those ways. Of course, there are other ways to look at it, and as President Serrata said earlier, it's not a zero-sum game. But often we use data to help illustrate certain points, and clearly that's a broader trend that's happening there. I don't want to speculate any more beyond that, other than to say, let's think about this issue as a growing gender gap, partly because women have accelerated their enrollment in higher education writ large, and males aren't keeping pace with that rate of acceleration.
Yeah. Victor, let me just add to that too, because I appreciate the caution in speculating about a lot of this. But we have seen some real clear economic components here where, you know, given the economic challenges we had as a country, the opportunity that males had to get into some areas where they could earn an income more readily created a real opportunity cost in going to college that we've been trying to track. So, you know, for example, places in South Texas and after the horrible situation in Hurricane Katrina, where we could find young men who could go and work in construction and make $25 an hour. And the opportunity cost of going to college versus making immediate resources was a real challenge to keep them enrolled and keep them in the pipeline. And that was a reality in the 90s that we were trying to track economically. So that just adds to some of the gaps and challenges we had. Those weren't opportunities generally as open to women to be involved in construction and things of that nature. So.
Okay, now we have a couple of questions that I'm putting together related to data, and I'll just read them kind of as one question. We have a few questions asking if you could share details about your data sources, and then in addition, questions about whether the data on Latino males is also broken down between U.S.-born and undocumented.
I assume that the first part of it is the data that I shared very quickly. I'm happy we can put those online so people can take a look at them. The data sources are all public. The high school dropout information and the college enrollment data are from the U.S. Department of Education Digest of Education Statistics. So those are readily available on the website there the Department of Education has. And then the attainment data the two where we just looked at the overall male attainment and then comparison to other males is available through the census. That's 2014 data, and that is also publicly available on the slides, and we'll have that available on our website. We cite the source at the very bottom, and if there are challenges, we're happy to forward the tables themselves if that would be helpful. The second question is about the data, if it's disaggregated by those who are undocumented or not. Unfortunately, we do not have those data disaggregated by immigration status. And so we are not able to collect it that way and share it that way.
Okay, next we have a question from Carolina Gonzalez, who asks, what strategies would you suggest to recruit and attract more Latino males to the teaching workforce?
So this is Victor again weighing in. The conversations that I have with educators, and particularly folks that train teachers, you know, there's a broader sort of trend around the increased feminization of the teacher workforce in this country, and in fact internationally as well. You see these trends playing out. And I think part of the way that we got to revisit this conversation is to think about how we signal to young men, adult men who have a desire to work with young children, because there's a lot of stigma around that kind of signaling that we give, you know, within the broader society. And I think addressing some of those conversations and stigmas may be really challenging, but I think that we have to be aware that there are sort of stigmas out there around why males who are well-intended and wanting to work with young kids, with children, may be stigmatized or perhaps discouraged from pursuing teaching as a viable career pathway, a viable vocation, as a matter of fact. So I think, one, our teacher prep programs, our colleges of education, those responsible for training teachers need to advance that conversation. I do know other prominent organizations like Teach for America and others have dedicated efforts focused on increasing the pipeline of Latino male and African American male teachers. There's other very prominent programs like Call Me Mister that focus on African American male teacher workforce. And I don't see similar concerted efforts targeting Latino male teacher workforce. And I think that's definitely an area where we need more leadership and progress to be made, recognizing the broader challenges that I've addressed around stigmas and being discouraged, but also finding creative ways to start that pipeline. And so I highlight the work of colleagues here at UT Austin, the U Teach program that I think has done well to cultivate the teacher workforce across disciplines, you know, these non-traditional areas where students majoring, let's say, in the STEM fields may not consider teaching a viable pathway, but in fact, you know, we found great success from efforts like that. So there are models out there that we can draw from, strategies that we don't have to go out and reinvent. It's just a matter of recognizing that, you know, there are some broader challenges about how we can recruit males in general, given some of these barriers, but also working through them creatively and trying to identify the pipeline and expand that pipeline in sort of non-traditional ways.
Ginny Case from UT San Antonio asks, how does the gender gap look in relation to the completion of other credentials like certificates?
I'll speak to El Paso Community College. What we see is less of a gap at certificate, and these are primarily, most of the certificate programs that we offer are what we at once deemed dirty jobs or blue-collar jobs. You're looking at CT1s in automotive and diesel, despite the fact that they've become incredibly technical programs with regards to, they don't even touch the vehicle until the computer tells them what's wrong with the vehicle. And so the gender gap still exists. It's just not quite as large as we see with associate's degrees, baccalaureates, and above.
Okay, Taryn Ozuna Allen asks, what are the unique characteristics of early college high schools that help promote Latino male success? What challenges, if any, do these graduates encounter in their transition to a four-year institution?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I certainly appreciate that. What we see is the support system is paramount. And We ensure we work with the district. We plan these out for well over a year. We partner with a nonprofit in Texas, Educate Texas, to really work on the application together. We look and determine capacity of dual credit opportunities at that specific high school before we sign off on allowing them to become an early college high school. And we ensure that once they are an early college high school or in the planning process, that they do have the support systems in place. That means counseling, that means tutoring, that means faculty being intrusive with those particular students if they see them running into any trouble. It means our faculty and our counselors also working closely with those particular students. So the support systems are incredibly robust. And this is one of the things that I often say with regards to higher education as we compare ourselves to K through 12. When I speak to K through 12 professionals, they always have ownership. I hear them say, my kids. And we need to learn from that and begin to embrace the concept of my students once they graduate from high school, and really take ownership of their success, providing intrusive support outside of the classroom, but ensuring that the rigor and quality in the classroom always continues to be there. So those are the kinds of support systems that we see. We have not seen any concerns. Now, 80% of our transfer students transfer to the University of Texas at El Paso. We have a great relationship with UTEP, and under President Natalicio's leadership, these students, as I said, as I referenced earlier, they outperform every other segment of the UTEP student body. And so we have not had any resistance with them whatsoever. We continue to see them do great things and to move forward. And we're going to continue to systematically and strategically expand those offerings, ensuring that the support is there at all of them. So what I tell our superintendents when they want to start a new early college high school is, okay, we need to make sure that we maintain that 73 or enhance that 73% graduation rate for these students. I want them to continue to graduate. Now, if you want to expand dual credit, we can do that quicker. But if we're going to expand early college high schools, we're going to do it very systematically, ensuring that the support is there.
To add to that, this is Victor. Great response, William, and a great question, Taryn. You know, one of the things we found early on in our research on Latino males is that they really tend to prefer very specific pathways to career. And, you know, I think dual enrollment in, let's say, in the Texas context, but even nationally, has done important work in trying to provide more guided pathways to college and career. And I think that's where there's some untapped potential in how we advance dual enrollment for the benefit of Latino males, but for the benefit of, let's say, all students that could partake in that. Because there's still a lot of inefficiency out there around those dual credit enrollment pathways. This happens to be another area of research that I'm focused on as well, dual credit, dual enrollment. And we see a lot of inefficiency. We also see a lot of very promising models. So I think understanding that males have an urgency, males, all students, all young people, but in particular for Latino males, our research indicated that there's a lot of urgency around you know, fulfilling those roles to family or being provider, being, you know, supporting the family financially. And so that economic urgency, I think, is often informing the kind of decisions they make about college. And, you know, Deborah mentioned the opportunity cost. Well, if they see going to college and kind of meandering their way for a few years as an opportunity cost, I think what dual enrollment, dual credit pathways could do better is really formulate those pathways in more guided, more efficient ways. As I know many institutions now around the state and around the country are pursuing through these guided pathways approaches. So I think that there's a lot of untapped potential there for how dual credit could help advance the opportunities available to Latino males, given the kind of economic urgency that might be guiding their decision making about going to college or going to career or finding a way to bridge both. And so I think that's an important area for further work, to be sure.
John Garcia from Congressman Ruben Hinojosa's office asks if there are any pieces of legislation currently in Congress that members should be looking at to help Latino males keep pace in higher education. What kinds of legislation would you like to see introduced?
So let me begin, and let me first say, you know, Congressman Hinojosa was my congressman when I lived in South Texas, so certainly a pleasure, and a congressman who's done so much for the work that we're attempting to move forward, not only in the state of Texas, but nationally. Summer Pell was paramount for all students, not just Latino males. But community colleges saw such surges in enrollment when we had extended our summer Pell. I know the administration has asked for that to be restored. Unfortunately, Congress has not been able to move that forward. I believe that the pilot of Pell for high school students is also showing promising results. These are some of the items that we look at with regards to, in particular, this population. So we certainly appreciate the good work of the congressman. We bid him wonderful retirement. We hope someone can fill those shoes with regards to increasing the enrollment matriculation as well as the success. And Pell Grants and financial aid are paramount to that.
Okay, we have time for this one last question, and this is from Joel Alvarado from Georgia Piedmont Technical College. Joel would like to see this conversation move regionally into the Southeast, where there's exponential Latino population growth, but a lack of student success and capacity to address this issue comprehensively and substantively. What are your thoughts on how to make that happen?
So this is Victor. I'll take it on first. Another great question, and in fact, in my work, I found that there are many regions of the country that may be feeling a bit neglected in that regard, given that sort of demographic urgency that parts of the country are experiencing. And I think what we could do, if I may build upon an earlier point I made, is that use the current moment that we're in, where there is national leadership around this issue focused on boys and young men of color, but to advance the conversation in such a way that we can also expand our definition of males of color, because I think often that's signals to certain communities about who that's focused on. But we have a demographic reality that cannot be ignored. And it's easy to say that in a state like Texas or California or New York or Florida, but increasingly, to your point, in other areas of the country where we don't often think about in those terms. And so the larger national imperative around boys and young men of color, I think, can be leveraged in ways to advance this issue, to expend some capital, political capital, to ensure that this issue is a priority at the local level, even in areas of the state or the country or the region where we don't traditionally think about there being a critical mass of the Latino community. But clearly that's changing, and I think also to lean on partners in states where there is greater awareness. Yes, we're only a handful of staff over here, but we often get inquiries from around the country about how this conversation can be advanced, and we certainly are willing to help in that regard, however we can, to help make this issue a priority for your respective areas.
And I think that Victor and the group and his team are working on evaluation of their mentoring program and their tools and resources that might be useful for those who are committed to the cause and need help in terms of resources and contacts to follow up. So that just builds on what Victor shared. But we don't have to completely reinvent the wheel, especially if you're in a community where there aren't large Latino populations, to be able to build on the good work of populations and work such as what Luis and Victor have done.
This has been a terrific discussion, but I'm afraid we're coming to the end of our time, and I will say that we have a great many questions that I'm afraid we've not been able to get to answer. But if we didn't get to your question, or if you have additional questions, please feel free to follow up with us after the call. And as a reminder, you will be receiving an email with all of the slides and other materials. So with that, I will hand it over to Sarita to close us out.
Absolutely. Really, we are delighted at the level of engagement, both in terms of the comments and energy and expertise that you've heard through this webinar, but also what we're seeing online, the level of interest, the many facets of how this conversation applies to your own communities. This is exactly what we had as our shared purpose in putting this together. I hope you will join me in thanking this panel. Deborah Santiago, William Serrata, and Victor Saenz. We are most appreciative to the University of Texas at Austin for its multifaceted collaboration with Excelencia in Education. The Office of Diversity and Community Engagement is a champion of these issues, and its president, President Fenves, is a president for Latino Student Success. Thanks to all of you. Our purpose in the work that we do on a daily basis is to inform, to activate, and to excel. And this webinar is most definitely right in our sweet spot. So we hope that you feel the same way. And to David's point, this is an artificial construct. We stopped this webinar, but the conversation continues. For those of you who are on social media, particularly Twitter, use the hashtag Latino Males. But we're delighted to announce, because it's brand new information, that we have just worked the busy schedules of Professor Victor Saenz to be able to announce right now that we will be adding a session at the Accelerating Latino Student Success ALAS workshop, which Excelencia in Education will hold in Washington, D.C. on September 22nd. This information is so new that there's nothing more than what you're hearing me say right now, but in a couple of days you will see more online. And know that as far as your opportunity to reach out directly to the panelists, you've got their email addresses. They are generous in terms of their information, but also in their willingness to respond to people who want to make action for progress. Thank you all so much for joining today's conversation on Latino males in higher education.